All right, now I want to turn our attention, still on page 9, to the year 1776. Wasn't that a great year in America? Boy, that was a banner. It was just great, wasn't it? Unless you've read David Macaulay's 1776. And then you have to say, whoa, this is one of the worst years in American history. And it really was. I mean, tragic things happened for the nation and for Thomas Jefferson. It was a difficult year for him. That's your blank. Difficult year for Jefferson. Why was it so difficult? Well, letter A, a daughter had recently died. You know that Jefferson had 6 children, 1 son and 5 girls. 1 son and 3 of the daughters died in their infancy. 1 died as she reached maturity, and only 1 lived to give him posterity. So this time, 1 had died. Letter C, or letter B, his wife was ill. His mother died that year. This was rough. This was a rough year. And he was particularly worried about Virginia. Did you know that Jefferson actually said, I think one day we will be free from the tyranny of England. But once we're free, there's not one state that knows what to do with freedom. Isn't that an interesting observation? He was like that. He said, if you don't know what to do with freedom, it can be rough. All you have to do is point to the ancient Israelites, right? They just wanted to be out there, out of Pharaoh's control. Okay, so Moses gets them out in the desert. You know the story. There's 2 to 3 million of them. And what do they start doing? What are we going to eat? What are we going to drink? Ah, the flesh pots of Egypt. They start dreaming about how it was back then. And some of them want to go back. And Jefferson said, if you don't know what to do with freedom, it can be rough. And so he said, and he kind of took it upon himself to help Virginia lead the way, because everybody looked to Virginia. It's the greatest state. And so under letter E, he wrote 3 constitutional drafts for Virginia in 5 weeks. 5 weeks. You ever try to write a constitution? When you didn't have one to go on. Huh? He did it. And guess what Virginia did with those 3? No, no, no. He had a hard time with it. And he said, you've got to get rid of the weaknesses in your system. That's your blank for number 3, top of page 10. Weaknesses. Well, what were some of those weaknesses? They're outlined here. Letter A, slavery. Now, why does that sound a little ironic for Jefferson to be saying, we've got to get rid of slavery? Huh? Because he owned slaves. Before you jump on the anti-Jefferson bandwagon for that, you need to understand history. First of all, where did he get his slaves? He inherited it from his father and his father-in-law. And if you've been to Monticello, which we go to every 2 years with our students, you see how he cared for them. They didn't want to leave. What would they do? And Jefferson actually said, he used these words, it would be more inhumane for me to send them away. What would they do? They would be hunted down. No. But you must solve this problem legislatively. See that? That's Jefferson. Letter B is primogeniture. Letter C is entailed estates. What in the world is all that? That's where, when the father dies, you have to give all his property over to the oldest son, no matter how competent he is. Well, what if there's no oldest son? Well, then, or any son at all. Well, then it goes to a nephew, an uncle, the closest male relative. You remember Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, some of these classics. This is all built on this primogeniture stuff. And Jefferson said, if you're going to be a free people, you cannot do that. You must let people do with their property what they will. This thing changed the feudal system. Virginia said, oh no, we got to keep this system. We got to keep this system. He couldn't get that done either. Look at the letter D. The official state church was left in power. It says, you must encourage religion equally, but not favor one over the other by saying this is the official church. You know, you couldn't hold certain offices in Virginia unless you were members of the Anglican Church. And Jefferson said, you can't do that in a free people. Oh, but we love our Anglican Church. So they they rejected his idea now. It's amazing. Letter E, the people were taxed to support the official church even though they weren't members of it. Do you see Jefferson's struggles here, folks? I hope you see this. It wasn't easy. He was a great pioneer. He kept working year after year after year. Got himself elected to the state legislature, appointed to committees, and he started working on the committees. And he got a lot of this stuff approved. It's amazing what he did. He was the one that kind of blazed the trail for many of our principles of liberty. Thomas Jefferson. I'm going to talk about this year, 1776. We think that was a great year, but you know one of the questions that was asked before, leading up to 1776 in the debates? Most Americans have never heard this. Here's the question. Are we good enough for freedom? What? Yeah, are we good enough? Do we deserve it by how we're acting? And some of them said, we're not there yet. And some of them said, well, we're not perfect, but that's an interesting, I love to have this conversation with young people. Are we good enough for freedom? What does that presuppose? What does that mean? That you have to be what? You have to have a certain level of goodness, what the founders called public virtue. There needs to be enough public virtue in the people in order to have and maintain freedom. This is all in their writings. And if you haven't achieved that, it will not hold. The foundation of freedom is morality and virtue. Wow. Where do you hear that from public officials? We're all trying to solve our problems without talking about the foundation. And it won't work. I'll give you some quotes here in a little bit. Here's another little thing I love to throw out to my students. I'll say, do you know that you don't have a right to do wrong? And they'll say, what do you mean? I don't know I'm right. I said that to one group, not in my students, it was another group. And there was one young guy, he says, what do you mean? This is a free country. I really don't want to do it. My rights. What is a right? A right is a legally protected privilege, isn't it? You have a right to do something, you're legally protected in doing it. Are you legally protected in doing wrong? No. So you don't have a right to do wrong. Oh. Now you may do wrong because you have agency, but you don't have a right to do wrong. So we need to get these conversations back in with our young people. We've got to get the perspective back in. Anyway. Jump over to page 11 if you would. Page 11. So this was the discussion. Are we good enough for freedom? And there was hesitation. A young man comes over from Europe named Thomas Paine, observes a little bit, writes a book, as you know, called Common Sense. Letter A is Common Sense there. And he says, you people don't think you're ready? Let me tell you what it's like in Europe. If you don't get off the boat, you're going to go down with her. So you better get going. Of course, that was a little spark that led to independence, as you remember. Now, fill in your blanks here real quickly. Letter B, on March 17th, Washington's forces liberated Boston. Here's a great story attendant to that. I don't have time to tell it to you. Letter C, on May the 4th, Rhode Island jumped the gun and declared independence all by herself. D, May the 10th, Congress authorized each colony to set up its own government. Letter E, May the 14th, Jefferson arrives in Philadelphia as a delegate to Congress. But he doesn't want to be there. Where does Jefferson want to be? Back in Virginia. He's trying to help Virginia. So you know what he does? He actually requests to be dismissed from Congress. And if his request would have been granted, what wouldn't he have written? The Declaration. As it was, his request was denied. Denied. Letter G, on June the 7th, Richard Henry Lee stands and makes his famous resolution that we're free and independent. And John Hancock, President of Congress, says, we're not going to vote on it right now, we're going to take a recess. We're going to recess until July 2nd. Meanwhile, you all go back to your states and make sure you know how they want you to vote on this resolution, because this is for all the marbles. This is it. And we'll come back on July the 2nd and take a vote, which is what they did. Meanwhile, letter H, on June the 11th, a committee of 5 people stay there and write a declaration. 5 included Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And under Roman numeral 4 is a little interesting conversation between Adams and Jefferson. This is recorded by John Adams about who should write the declaration. You've all been on a committee, haven't you? On one form or another. Who does the work on a committee? Usually one person. That has to go through one brain, right? Well, that's what happened. So John Adams is writing this, and he said, Jefferson proposed to me to make the draft. I said, I will not. You should do it. Jefferson, oh no, why will you not? You ought to do it. Adams, I will not. Does it sound like John Adams? Jefferson, why? Adams, reasons enough. It is very formal New England talk. Reasons enough. What we say out there in Missouri when somebody asks you why? Because. Reasons enough. Yeah. Jefferson, what can be your reasons? Adams, reason first, you are a Virginian. And a Virginian ought to appear at the head of this business. Members of the big state. So, reason second. I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. Question is, was he? He kind of was. And he knew it. This is a great man, John Adams. But he knew he wrote people wrong sometimes. They kind of wondered about it. As a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting. He writes, there's a little quote in the 5,000 Year League. He says, monuments, mausoleums, memorials will never be erected to me. Panegyrical romances will never be written. Those are elaborate eulogies that carry on at your funeral, right? Panegyrical romances. They will never be written to transmit my memory to my posterity in brilliant colors. What's he saying? His memory will just what? Just kind of fade away. So you go to Washington today, what do you see? Jefferson Memorial, Washington Monument, Lincoln Memorial. Where's John Adams? You got to go to Braintree, Massachusetts to see anything about John Adams. That's where he lived. He just kind of knew it. So that's the way he felt about himself. It says, reason third, you can write 10 times better than I can. He's probably trying to butter him up. So Jefferson says, well, if you were decided, I will do as well as I can. That's how Jefferson came to write the Declaration. And he worked on the draft for 17 days. 17 days. Now, you know the draft. It has 2 paragraphs at the beginning. How does the Declaration start? First paragraph. We the people, that's the Constitution. When in the course of human events, there you go. There you go. Second paragraph. In the second. We hold these truths. That's quoted here. We hold these truths. That's a required memorization of all 4th graders in Arizona. That paragraph, or first part of that paragraph. And then there's a big long list. What's the list? List of grievances against the king, and then there's the concluding paragraph and the signature. How long did it take Jefferson to write the list? 1 day. He already actually had it written in another document, so it's just a matter of copying. You say, what was he doing the other 16 days? Say, well, he was writing the first 2 paragraphs. 2 paragraphs in 16 days, students, what do you think? Huh? What was he trying to do? He was trying to incorporate the ancient principles that he had studied in these civilizations of the past into this document. Did he do it? Draft after draft after draft. Did he do it? Yes. Incredible. Ancient Israel, Anglo-Saxon, these cultures that the founders studied at great length, and Jefferson started saying ancient principles. We need to incorporate these ancient principles into our government. And that's what he was doing for 16 days. Did he do it? Yes. Brilliant. Brilliant. So now we're very quickly, before we take a break, if you mind, we're going to talk about some of these ancient principles so that you make sure you know. They've already been mentioned here a little bit, and I appreciate that. Top of page 13. Did you get your language 2, letter C? Number 1, that sound government should be based on self-evident truth. What's a self-evident truth? What is it? Yeah, it's the way things are. Self-evident truth. It's so obvious you don't have to sit around and debate it. Right? What should we say? I don't see it here, but the sun is shining. Hopefully the sun's trying to prove that to you. I can say that in Arizona. I'm always want sun shining. Okay? This is a podium. I'm alive. Could have me prove that to you? I said that to 400 Boy Scouts one time. Yeah, prove. You probably know there are people who sit around debating whether we're alive or not. Usually find those on university campuses. Do you feel alive? I don't know. I don't think I feel alive. What do you feel? I feel like I'm being dreamed. Maybe we should say deemed. That's a new word. You could just go on with that one. Anyway. Yeah. This is self-evident. It's amazing. Self-evident. Truths that are self-evident. Number 2, that the government here on earth of mankind should be based on the law of nature and of nature's God. We've already talked about that, natural law. Number 3, this presupposes that the Creator made human beings equal. Wow. Are we all equal? No, we're unequal in so many ways, but we are to be treated equally in 3 ways. And here we are in our rights, before the law, for our justice, and in the sight of God. And number 4, the rights which have been bestowed by the Creator on each individual are unalienable. What's an inalienable right? One which is given by the Creator, which man has no authority or right to take away. Those are inalienable rights. Now, you know you have other rights that are not inalienable? Yeah. For example, the right to a trial by jury. That's not an inalienable right. That was a right that was developed by government, mostly actually by the Anglo-Saxons, as the best way in a court of law to protect the inalienable rights of the people. We call those vested rights. And vested rights can be changed by government. You can list those. So you have 2 kinds of rights, inalienable and vested. Okay? Number 5, the most important of the inalienable, as we've already heard here today, are the right to life, liberty, and the right to pursue anything you want to pursue that you believe leads to your happiness, as long as you do not invade the rights of others. And as I tell my young students, this is real freedom. When you can do anything you want to do, as long as you don't invade the rights of other people. And then I usually say this: I don't think you know what real freedom is. They all look at me and we don't, Mr. Taylor? I don't think so. They say, why do you say that? Well, you grew up in such a regulated society. I don't think you know what real freedom is. They don't quite understand that until we get into a little deeper. But this is real freedom. Number 6, then the most basic reason to set up a system of government is so that the rights of the people can be protected and preserved. Protected and preserved. Now, I want to give you a couple of little examples here. Protected and preserved. Let me ask you this question. Do I have the right to stand in my doorway of my home with a loaded weapon, day and night, if I want to protect my home? Do I have the right? No, I have the right. Do I have the right to stand out on my front yard with my garden hose, day and night, if I want to protect my home against fire? Do I have the right? I have the right. Do I want to do those things? No. I don't want to do those things. What do I want to do? I want to get some sleep. I want to be with my family. I want to do school. I want to come to Missouri. There's lots of things I'd rather do than this. And my neighbors basically feel the same way. So what do? We go down here to Joe, a nice, strong young man. Joe, how would you like to work for us? Yeah, doing what? Well, each of us can do this, protect our home. And because we have the right to do it, we want to delegate some of that authority to you to do it for us. And to evidence that authority, we're going to give you a badge. And to enforce it, because we can, we're going to give you a gun and authorize you to use it. And we'll buy you a car, we're going to put some lights on top, and you just drive around the neighborhood and do for us what we could do for ourselves. But for efficiency's sake, he wants you to do it for us. I think I can do that. We go down here to Sam, we say, Sam, how would you like to work for us? We're going to buy you a big truck, put a big tank on it, paint it red, long hose, big hat, big coat, big boots, you know the story, and a phone, and if we call you, please hurry, because our house will be on fire. Make sure that tank is always full of water. Think you can do that? Yes, I think I can. I ask you folks, what have we created here? A what and a what? We call it a what and a what? Police and fire. What is it really? One word. Starts with a G. Government. Government. It's the delegation of authority which we have, which each individual has, to someone else to more efficiently do something for us. That's all government is. Well, I guess we should say that's all government should do. Now let me give you another example. I live here. The Jones live on this side of me, and the Smiths live on this side of me. And the Jones family, they struggle. Really struggle. As a matter of fact, they have a big family, and he has a difficult time making a living, I guess. So they don't even have an automobile. That's pretty tough nowadays. Over here, the Smiths, there's two of them, and they've got two cars. And I noticed they only drive one. One's always sitting there. Now, I'm in the middle. And by now, you know I'm a very compassionate, merciful person. And I notice this inequity that goes on. And it begins to bother me. Matter of fact, it bothers me so much. The plight of the Jones family, the opulence of the Smiths, begins to bother me so much. I go over to Mr. Smith and I say, Mr. Smith, have you noticed the plight of the Jones family? He says, well, so we talk about it. He says, yeah, that's pretty bad. I said, I have a suggestion for you, Mr. Smith. Why don't you give that car that you never drive over to Mr. Jones? He said, well, thank you for the suggestion. But I insist. Get out of here. So I come back home. I'm pretty dejected, being the compassionate, merciful person that I am. And this isn't right for him to be so hard-hearted. So late one night, I'm thinking about this. I can't sleep. So around midnight, I get up. I'm a good mechanic, too. And I go over here, and I hotwire that extra car. And I drive it over to Mr. Jones. And I say, Mr. Jones, knock on the door, wake him up. Mr. Jones, I have something for you. You do? Yeah, call. Really? Yeah, it's all yours. Wish I had a key, but it just Oh, well, thank you. I made a friend. Oh, yeah. About to lose a friend. Anyway, I come back. I just feel so good about being the compassionate, merciful person that I am. And I sleep so soundly until I get a knock at the door the next morning, and I open the door, and there stands the sheriff. He says, your fingerprints are all over that car over there. Well, of course, you'd do the same thing if you were as compassionate and merciful as I am. Well, you tell that to the judge, so I'm arrested. I'm hauled off. I'm convicted. It's a serious business. Grand larceny. I got to spend a couple of years in the pokey. And while I'm in there, I'm saying to myself, there ought to be a better way to do this. So I developed this plan. When I eventually get out, I go to all the neighbors. And I start getting them all worked up about how this family is struggling. And all this extra that just seems to be extra sitting there. Matter of fact, I start passing a petition around to get the question on the next ballot. If the Smiths should give a car to the Jones. And we get enough signatures, and it's on the ballot. We're good campaigners, and guess what? It passes by a majority. Now it's public law. Public law. But the Smiths must give up their cards to Jones. Public law to be enforced by the sheriff. All right, let's talk about this. What's the matter here? I want to get down to the very root of this problem. What is it? If I don't have authority to do something as an individual, because the founder said, the only place where authority to govern exists innately at the beginning is where the Creator put it in each individual. He didn't put it in any government. He just put it with individuals. You have the authority to govern yourself. And if you create a government, you can only authorize government to do what you can legitimately delegate them to do. Can you delegate a power you don't have? No. And if government does something that they're not authorized legitimately to do, they're out of bounds. What do we call that? One word. The founders call this. Starts with a U. Usurpation. Anything beyond what individuals legitimately and legally can authorize their government to do, anything beyond that is usurpation. In other words, if something is illegal for me to do, like taking Mr. Smith's car and giving it to Mr. Jones, I cannot delegate the power to my agent of government to do it for me. Because I don't have that power. This is so basic, folks, to the founders' philosophy. And I'm sure you know it's one that is so totally violated. Have you noticed what's happening today in almost any governmental level? If I can get a majority of votes, I can do it. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. There doesn't seem to be any limitation on anything. So anyway. I'm going to pause right here. We're going to take a 10-minute break. I want to mention just before we get started, we have, speaking of Thomas Jefferson, as I said, he was one of the ones that kind of blazed the trail. We have 3 books back there. One's called The Real Thomas Jefferson, The Real Benjamin Franklin, and The Real George Washington. And people say, why do you have books on these people? There's hundreds of books out there on these people. Why do we need more? Have you noticed that most books written on these men are written from a particular perspective of the author? And so we say, okay, who can tell their story the best? Straight up. How about letting them tell their story? So the first half of these books is the story, in this case, of Thomas Jefferson, mostly in his own words. I'm telling you, you will thrill as you read these concepts. You read answers to current problems by Thomas Jefferson. It will thrill you. So I just hope that we have these 3 back there. You can buy them individually, or you can buy all 3 of them for $40. $40 to have on your I Love America bookshelf at home. And the last half of these books, I should say this, is their quotes. In this case, the timeless treasures of Thomas Jefferson. What we've done is gone through his writings. We've done the same thing with Washington and Franklin, and topicalized his most famous quotes and alphabetized them. So you want to know what Jefferson, what he thought about centralization of government? There's some great ones. You want to know what he talks about? The future, Jefferson's belief in the future life. I mean, this is all here. It is incredible. You want to know what he said about banks? You would think he lived today from what he said about banks and the proper banking system versus the not so proper banking system. Amazing. You want to know what he said about our money and the kind of money we should have? What he said about newspapers, what he said about taxation, all here. Jefferson, Franklin, Washington. So hopefully you'll make that a part of your library. Well, we're talking briefly about the Declaration, and these principles form the foundation of our Constitution. You'll learn this afternoon. It's not difficult to go through the Constitution once you understand basic foundational principles. And that's why the Declaration is so important. It lays out the principles. And I just want to point out to you, as we were talking earlier, about the authority of government. Only that which people legitimately delegate. Legitimately, number one, have as authority to do, and then can delegate it to government. Now, where I'm from in Arizona, in the Valley of the Sun, we have a lot of swimming pools in backyards for obvious reasons. And with those, lots of swimming pools come tragedy every year of deaths, young children, toddlers falling in, and even adults drowning for whatever reason. And a well-meaning senator many years ago introduced a bill in the Arizona legislature to make it a state law to fence your pool with a certain, right around your pool with a certain gate, certain locking mechanism, make it a state law. So I asked my students, it's okay, if you were in the legislature, how would you think, how would you vote on that bill? What's the first thing you should do? Say, well, do I have authority to legislate on that kind of a thing? It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, compassionate or not, do I have authority? And I tell my students, take it down to the very simplest. Let's say there's only two people on the earth, you and I, and you're building a swimming pool. Do I have the authority to come over to your house and say, I require you to fence your pool? Do I have that authority? No. Okay. So if I don't have that authority, how can I delegate that authority to my agent, the government, to do it for me? And you have to say, I can't. See, as compassionate as it may sound, what has to be your vote? No. Here's another example. Do I have the authority as an individual to force you to buckle up? I don't have that authority. Then how can I authorize my agent, the government, to force you to buckle up? Wow. Now, if this is new to some of you, this might sound way out, but I just ask you to think about it. We're talking about legitimate delegated authority here. Here's another one. Do I have the authority to require my neighbor to get my permission for him to be a plumber? I don't have that authority. But do you know he does? He has to get the permission of my agent, the government, to be a plumber. This is what the founders are talking about, folks. Real freedom. It's what I'm talking about when I tell my young people. I'm not sure you know what real freedom is. Or I can do anything I want to do as long as I do not invade the rights of others. That's real freedom. I got to this point years ago in a seminar in Libby, Montana. You know where Libby is? On the Spokane side of Montana. And there were about 6 or 7 men over on that side, and they started talking to each other, really talking to each other. Of course, as a teacher, you kind of notice it, but you don't know whether you're about ready to be taken to task or what. At the next break, one of them came up to me and he said, Mr. Taylor, we're all from the Montana State Legislature. He said, we have never heard this. And he said, I'm running for leadership in the legislature next year. If I win, you think you can come up a week before the session starts and teach this to the whole legislature? That would be a great thing. That would be a great honor. I'm still waiting for his phone call. I guess he didn't win. But this is what Thomas Jefferson meant when he said, our legislators do not understand the limits of their authority. Those are his words. They just think they can do anything. And the founders are saying, no, only what is legitimately delegated from individuals can you do. So, each of you has a copy of the Constitution here. And if you were to look at Article 1, Section 8 of this document, which is on page 6, and of course, every public official, as you know, takes an oath to support this document, right? The Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 is the section which outlines the powers that the people delegate to Congress. Matter of fact, it starts, Section 8. The Congress shall have power to, and then it lists. And if you number them, there's about 20. About 20 things that the people have delegated power for Congress to do. And they're very specific. Okay, so if you're a congressman, and I ask my students this, if you're a congressman and a bill is presented to you, well, let's just take one at random here. Let's just say universal health care. That's presented to you. What's the first thing you should do? Well, after reading the bill, right? What's the first thing after reading the bill, or at least knowing what the bill is about? What's the first thing you should do? Article 1, Section 8. And you say, okay, Congress has the power to. Let's see, do I have the power to? So you go, let's see, universal health care, universal. It's not there. What then must be your vote? It doesn't matter how good it is. It doesn't matter how compassionate it may sound. Your vote must be no. No authority. The people have not delegated me the authority to do that. End of discussion. Next question. Wouldn't that be great? Don't you get tired of all the debate? Who's going to pay for it? What's it going to do? I mean, legitimate bills need to be debated, don't get me wrong. But this, let's just cut to the chase and say, do you have authority? No. It's all usurped. See how simple this is? Founders had answers, folks. Anyway, we'll talk more about Article 1, Section 8. So I just wanted to remind us what we ended with before the break. Must have delegated authority. That was so basic to the founders. And that was all. Can you believe all this is in the Declaration of Independence? It is. And that was number 6. Number 7, we're on page 13, by the way. Number 7, it follows that no office or agency of government has any right to exist except with the consent of the people, for this very reason we just said. And number 8, the last principle is, if the government, either by malfeasance or neglect, fails to protect these rights, or even worse, if the government itself begins to violate these rights, then it is the right and duty of the people to regain control of their affairs and set up another system. And aren't we grateful, folks, that we can do this because the founders gave us this system every 2 years? If we want to, badly enough, we could do that. Do you know what we could do every 2 years? We could sweep out nearly every member of every state legislature, the whole House of Representatives in Washington, 1/3 the Senate, and every other 2 years do the whole thing again, another third of the Senate, the President. This is real power. We call it the power of peaceful self-repair. We don't need to do it by any other system, but we have to want to badly enough. And of course, don't you think the founders would have wished they could have done it that way, to vote away King George? But see, they didn't have that. They didn't have a system, so they couldn't do it that way. It is remarkable the system they gave us, and if you believe that our Constitution has a shred left, maybe that shred is the right to vote. And if we want to badly enough, we can turn it around. Turn over to page 14. After the Declaration was adopted, we were a new nation. Of course, we had to defend it, but we were a new nation. And Congress appointed a committee of 3 people to come up with a seal for the United States. And the committee was made up of Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams. And at the bottom of page 14, you see an artist's depiction of their proposed seal. You see some quotes there above that. Won't take time to read it. The proposed seal for the United States. Can you see this? What do you observe there? Two ancient civilizations that the founders said you must look to for liberty. What do you see? Ancient Israel and Anglo-Saxon. Whoa. Where do you see that in history books today? You don't. And yet look at the documentation just above there, right out of the U.S. Department of State records. We are cheating our young people when we don't teach them the roots of liberty.
Yes, that's true.
And those of you that are involved in public education, you may notice how some of our people are just consumed with this Rome and Greece thing. You notice that? And founders knew a lot about Rome and Greece, mostly what not to do. But they said, you want to look at liberty, real liberty. You look at ancient Israel and Anglo-Saxon. See, that's totally almost lost from public education today. If you went to Harvard to the commencement address, commencement exercises at Harvard for the first number of years, guess what language you had to know to understand the commencement address? Hebrew. Hebrew. As one professor said, that's the language of freedom. That's the language of liberty.